The government has published details of its so-called Great Repeal Bill the day after the UK officially began to sever its ties to the EU. Among the thousands of details, it will also involve the transposing of EU laws into UK laws to avoid a legal black hole when Brexit finally happens. This, said Brexit Secretary David Davis, will end the supremacy of EU law in the UK, but also means no sudden changes for businesses and workers' rights, environmental protection and consumer rights currently enshrined in EU laws will continue when Britain leaves. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster tonight. Gary.
Well, for a lot of Brexit long marchers, Tory MPs amongst them, quite a few of them, this was what it was all about, bringing lawmaking back from Brussels and into the building behind me. There are already controversies around the executive powers that the government is taking in order to achieve some of this. They say there's nothing underhand going on. There'll be enormous controversy around some of the other bills that accompany the so-called Great Reform Bill, not least reform of immigration that's got to be in place ahead of the Brexit date. But I suspect the really big controversy that will put all of this in the shadow is probably awaiting the other side of the Brexit date. When you've got these thousands of statutes sitting here, some politicians desperate to defend them, and some politicians who've waited all their lives to sink their teeth into them. EU laws on workers' rights, environmental standards, product standards, all walks of life, thousands of them, are going to be imported into British law, so that the laws here are pretty much the same the day after the UK leaves the EU as they would have been the day before. The Brexit Secretary David Davis told the Commons from that day onwards the UK Parliament would be able to throw out what it didn't like. But he said there was much that would be kept.
To provide the maximum possible legal certainty, the Great Repeal Bill will convert EU law into domestic law on the day we leave the European Union. This means, for example, that the workers' rights, environmental protection and consumer rights that are enjoyed under EU law in the UK will continue to be available in the UK law after we've left the European Union.
Many of the most passionate supporters of Brexit wanted to leave the EU so they could rip up much EU employment law, environmental law, and will not want it sitting on British statute books for long.
Making it clear that 2 years from today, our sovereign parliament will indeed have the power to amend, repeal or improve all this ghastly EU legislation.
I will pass on the assessment of the legislation.
Some people listening to David Davis today might get the feeling that, like some gorgeous artefact, the European laws have been brought over and are going to be admired in a glass case forever, particularly employment law, environmental law. He singled those out. Is that how it feels to you?
Well, initially we're going to have it, and we'll then decide which bits we want to keep and which bits we don't. But I find it very hard to imagine any situation where Britain is not a more competitive and more deregulated country after this process, right? I just think the centre of gravity here, from all parties, is much more about consumers and producers, much more about freedom than it is in Brussels.
It's just a complete calmness. The idea that they're going to transfer all these European directives, which, by the way, Brexiteers have been frothing at the mouth against for years, if not decades, and transpose them into British law and say, because they're now nicely nestled in British law, they're okay now. I mean, does anyone seriously think...
They're going to rip the lot up, you think?
Does anyone seriously think the right wing of the Conservative Party, the editor of the Daily Mail, likes the Habitats Directive or the Working Time Directive or the Green Renewable Energy Directive? In fact, all of those directives and many others were listed as targets for repeal on the front page of the Daily Telegraph just a few days ago.
Pro-Remain Lib Dems say they'll try to ambush the Great Reform Bill. With up to 15 other bills following in the wake of that mighty bill, it could be there's hardly any room for the normal domestic legislation that parties get elected to push through.
When Thatcher went there...
Lord Lisvane was a clerk in Parliament for 42 years. Some people have talked about 80% of government business having a Brexit label on it, being Brexit related. It could be like that, couldn't it?
Yes, I don't think 80% is particularly out of the way, simply because EU competence spreads so widely, and in the areas where there isn't EU competence, and it's purely a domestic matter, there will be knock-ons to consider. So I think everything will have, it'll be like a stick of rock with Brexit written all the way through.
Theresa May's two biggest backers in the newspaper world cheered what they saw as a threat to Europe delivered yesterday. Headlines that will have been studied carefully by Europe's leaders. Some of them gathered today in Malta.
Right after receiving the letter from Prime Minister Theresa May invoking Article 50, I said that paradoxically there is also something positive in Brexit. Brexit has made us, the community of 27, more determined and more united than before.
Chancellor Merkel didn't even mention Brexit in her speech here, a reminder that Europe has much else on its plate right now, only adding to their irritation with Brexit.
Well, the perceived warnings in Theresa May's Article 50 letter about Brexit's effect on the fight on crime and terrorism have caused concern, if not consternation, in Brussels. Earlier, I spoke to Guy Verhofstadt, the EU Parliament's chief Brexit negotiator, and I asked him how he felt about the repeated references to security in the Prime Minister's letter.
Well, yeah, I was a little bit shocked by it, because the rest of the letter of Mrs. May is very constructive. But on this point, that cannot be accepted. You cannot use the security of our citizens in a negotiation in saying, oh yeah, we're going to only cooperate on the security of our citizens in the fight against terrorism if we have a good trade deal. That you don't do. It's all separate issues.
Did you read it as a threat?
Well,
That's the way you
I think that
interpreted it.
everybody read this as a threat in Europe. And nevertheless, it was the only point, because I found the tone of the letter very constructive. And when a journalist yesterday asked me, yeah, is that not blackmailing? I said, yeah, I'm a gentleman. I never believe that a lady as Mrs. May will even think to use a blackmail.
In the spirit of tit for tat, the impression I get is that the threat from London about security was answered by a threat here in Brussels about the rights of EU citizens in the UK. In other words, if there is no deal on those rights pronto, then there will be no deal at all.
Now, what I think is that we have to stop well, the letter needed to be sent, but I think that we have to stop to do this little fight outside the negotiation room. What we need to do is to agree that first things first. What we need to do, the first thing to settle, are the rights of the residents, the UK residents on the continent
So why didn't you
and
start?
the EU.
Why didn't you fire the first shot in a spirit of goodwill?
I don't fire the first shot. What I'm saying is we need a solution for both. So for me, even before talking about money, I want an agreement in September, October, November on these residents' rights.
So that's your priority?
That's my priority.
Is it your suspicion that the British government will use EU citizens in the UK, 3 million of them, as a bargaining chip?
Well, that cannot be done.
But is it your suspicion that it is being done?
So I think that cannot be done. Like, we cannot use the UK citizens living in... At the end, who is the victim of all this, of this political fight? That are citizens. And if they have an UK passport, if a EU passport, that doesn't matter. It are citizens.
The impression I get, forgive me if I'm wrong, is that there is a suspicion in this city, kind of nurtured after years of dealing with British exceptionalism, that the Brits will try and do something sneaky through the back door, will try and stitch up separate deals with different countries. Yeah. Is that true? Is that the way you see it?
Certainly in the minds of some people
that's a yes, then.
that exist, not in my mind, because the best way to deal with this is to keep the unity of the 27. So what we're going to do, and what we are saying, is that the European Union, its mandate that we give to Mr. Barnier, we have to keep on board all the interests of the 27.
That's going to be tough, isn't it?
So it's going to be tough, I know that. Unity of the 27 is not an easy thing, I know that. But if we take on board all the interests of the 27 countries, including and especially Ireland, who is most affected I should say, by the Brexit, then we can keep this unity.
I mean, again, looking at the tone on both sides, it does sound to me as if we're setting ourselves up for a pretty rancorous divorce here.
Divorce is always difficult. We know it. It's always difficult. But nevertheless, it's also an opportunity.
It's not very positive.
No, but it is also an opportunity to find a new partnership between the EU and the UK. What is absolutely necessary. We are proposing an association agreement. Will it be difficult? Yes. Will it be take a number of years? Yes, but it's also an opportunity, I think.
Try and put yourself into a Brexiteer's shoes, if you will.
That's
I know that's going to be difficult for
you.
you. But what is the upside for Britain in all this?
What do you mean with upside?
I mean, you know, is there anything positive about Brexit from where you're standing? Anything at all?
No, but the only positive thing in it is that we finally maybe can find an agreement on a discussion, a dispute that is already poisoning a little bit the relations for a number of decades.
You're quite happy that Britain is leaving, aren't you?
No, I'm not from that. No. I know.
We were a pain in your side.
No, right, you could see it that way. No, what I'm sad about it because I think it's weakened Europe as a whole.
How big is the temptation here to make an example of Britain in the divorce talks as a signal to other European nations, member states, who might be contemplating the same rush to the departure?
It's not a question of punishment, it's not a question of revenge, this negotiation. What I see is not a domino effect since Brexit in Europe. I see a reverse domino effect. What I see is that since Brexit, more and more the public opinion is going towards a more pro-European stance. People are saying, yeah, I'm also very critical towards the European Union, but I'm not so stupid to leave it or to destroy it.
Guy Verhofstadt, thanks very much. Now, one of the bastions of British commerce, Lloyd's of London, is to set up a new European subsidiary in Brussels to avoid losing business when the UK leaves the EU. Other financial institutions have also said that they're thinking of moving some of their business to other parts of Europe. And Dublin appears for some to be the location of choice. It is, for now, contingency planning, but does it foreshadow a more profound shift for the British economy? Here's our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy.
It's an institution as old as the City of London itself. What began as an outlet offering maritime insurance from a coffee shop is now, 328 years later, the world's largest insurance market. But today, Lloyd's of London said it would also become Lloyd's of Brussels, setting up an office in the heart of Europe to mitigate the potential damage of Brexit.
We're going to be regulated like a Belgian insurer under the regulation of the Belgian regulator. And that's what we're doing.
The thousands of brokers that operate here underwrite business across the world, including Europe. That's a service they want to continue offering, and the only way to guarantee that is to be there yourself.
We have had to think about it long and hard, but it's so important. It's affecting directly 5% of our revenues. And importantly, we've been doing business with those European clients for so long. You know, we must continue coverage for them. We must be able to provide those specialist products to them.
11% of Lloyd's business comes from Europe. 5% of it will now move to Brussels. But if certain regulatory regimes are not in place post-Brexit, then this warning that the rest will have to move to the Brussels subsidiary too.
It's important that our regulator understands that and that the regulatory regime here is equivalent to the EU so that we can continue to write a load of that other business here. Otherwise, that's got to go through our EU sub as well.
The question is whether this move by Lloyd's of London fits a pattern, because we also learned today that JP Morgan, the powerful American investment bank, is considering buying a building in Dublin to relocate as many as 1,000 of its bankers. And that on top of staff moves by HSBC, UBS and Goldman Sachs. All point, some say, to a worrying exodus from the City of London. And this 2 years before we exit. Goldman has said it will move hundreds more staff to Europe and expand its office space there as a contingency plan, because it cannot bank on there being a transitional period to adjust to life post-Brexit. While JP Morgan's boss warned before last June's referendum that the bank could move as many as 4,000 of its 16,000 UK staff out of London, today we learnt those bankers could end up in a new office in Dublin. It declined to comment today, but Lloyd's of London was happy to talk. And when the institution that underwrites and understands risk better than any other decides it's time to act, the chances are others will follow.
Leaving aside the nature of Britain after Brexit, what about Britain's nature? The bulk of our environmental protections are European ones, and conservationists worry that our wildlife could be under threat post-Brexit. Channel 4 News has obtained a copy of the government's much-delayed 25-year plan for the environment. It's ambitious in scope, but will it help protect the environment better than European laws have done until now? Here's our science editor, Tom Clark.
Less than 10 miles from the centre of Manchester is wilderness. Astley Moss is one of the last fragments of the Manchester mosslands, a vast area of peat bog drained over centuries for agriculture and industry. It's a vital habitat for rare wildlife, created by moss slowly rotting into peat. This bog is at least 6,000 years old, so is it too much to expect from government a 25-year plan to preserve and restore England's biodiversity? The Lancashire Wildlife Trust are trying to breathe more life into this bog.
We're walking on a peat bund now,
OK.
And that helps hold the water in and get the site nice and wet.
Today, volunteers are planting a type of heather, cross-leaved heath, to encourage the return of a rare butterfly long extinct in Lancashire. But this place isn't just good for wildlife, it serves us too, from our water to fighting climate change.
70% of our drinking water runs through a peat bog, so it's really important for us having clean water. Then there's the carbon stored in the peat. You know, they hold 10 times as much carbon as our forests.
In the jargon, these services nature provides can be accounted for as natural capital. This balance sheet approach to conservation is the one government has embraced. Channel 4 News has obtained a copy of the government's long overdue 25-year plan for the environment. The Green Paper outlines how future environment spending from air quality all the way to our oceans needs to be better integrated. And there's one overriding theme: nature will have to help pay for itself. According to the 25-year plan documents, this is exactly the sort of site that could benefit, because peat bogs aren't just great for biodiversity. They do things like store carbon, hold back floodwaters, clean water, and it makes sense that landowners should be rewarded for those public services. But what conservationists worry about is it doesn't leave much room for the nature that can't earn its own keep. It's hard to put a price tag on a hedgehog, and it's not just because they're prickly. Much of our wildlife has no utilitarian value, but is treasured nonetheless.
Yes, use natural capital to value the things and put prices on things which you can potentially market, but at the same time, but not for species. Let's make sure we're clear about we want to keep these species in our country, and let's take action to look after them.
Conservationists like the plan in principle, but with Britain about to leave the EU, they warn against a return to the bad old days.
More than 3.5 million tonnes of industrial waste are dumped into the North Sea each year.
It was the threat of fines from Brussels that often forced successive governments to act on things like dumping industrial waste and sewage on our beaches. We may carry over most of Europe's environment laws in today's Great Repeal Bill, but there's no new mechanism to enforce them. On the plus side, leaving Europe's agriculture and fisheries policies behind could help us protect the environment better.
So once-in-a-generation opportunity to try and get a new agriculture and land use policy, and indeed a new fisheries policy, which helps not only provide thriving agriculture and fisheries industries, but also to improve the environment on land and at sea.
In a statement, DEFRA told us it remains committed to publishing a long-term plan to protect the environment. The delay is almost certainly due to the demands of Brexit. Now we've voted to get our country back, the work begins to look after the nature that comes with it.